Good evening, everybody. How are you? Janelle, how are you doing? Can you check your mute one more time?
I'm doing awesome. How are you tonight, Beth?
I'm good. We're going to get this right one of these times. Hi, everybody. My name is Beth Macros, and alongside my co-host, Janelle McCauley, we're going to be talking tonight about some topics, particularly surrounding the issues of competition and scarcity mindset or mentality. So welcome to Creating Lift. Janelle and I started this podcast slash show slash channel as an opportunity to share some of our experiences and hopefully provide some perspective or mentoring on issues that we saw throughout our careers. Between the two of us, we have over 40 plus years of flying aircraft and serving as senior leaders in the military, commanders, combat aviators, as well as Janelle has quite a good experience now in the private sector as an entrepreneur and motivational speaker and instructor on mindset and mindfulness, etc. So anyway, we're thrilled to have everybody with us tonight for tonight's version of, or tonight's episode, if you will, our fourth episode of Creating Lift. And all right, any updates, Janelle, that you want to share with the group?
No, and nothing particular. I am here tonight. I'm on the road next week, so we'll see how that kind of comes through. But no, I'm really excited to get started. And as you mentioned, I think tonight's topic we'll be able to talk about not only like our military experience, but I think there's a lot that's going to apply in the entrepreneurial world as well. So I'm excited to get started.
Yeah, great. I will be looking forward to those lessons. I don't have those lessons. I'm still sheltered within the confines of the Department of Defense. So I'm looking forward to those lessons. So I'll kick it off. So one of the things that I really struggled with in my years in the military, and I still struggle with though a little bit less because of where I am in my career and sort of the settled job that I'm into at this point. But what I really struggled with a lot of times was this feeling of being sort of hyper competitive with the people that I'm supposed to be working with on a team. And so, as we were talking about what are some of the things that we struggle with, for me, it was how do I behave in a sort of competitive environment, again, where you're competitive against each other. And so again, for us, let's just say that, that's true in college. You're competing to get good grades because how we performed out of the academy helped us decide what job we were going to go into. So we were competitive against each other to figure out whether we'd get a pilot training slot or whether we would, whatever job. And then in pilot training, you're very competitive against each other because you are looking to figure out what aircraft you're going to go fly, right? So that's a very competitive environment. And then you get into the workforce or into the service, and then you're competing against each other for sort of rankings within your peers or within your squadron so that you can be ranked higher so that you can get promoted or get better jobs. Some of it has to do with sort of just promotion so that you have the opportunity to get to a level of command so you can be forward, and I know this is true in many work environments. And so I got to a point where we were supposed to be a team working to achieve a mission or a goal. And yet I felt like it had this very competitive mentality or this feeling of scarcity, like there's just not enough opportunities for everybody to go around. And so if there's not enough opportunities, then that drives that, again, I think Stephen Covey calls it the scarcity mentality, which is to say there's just a limited number of opportunities. And if there's limited, then people are not going to naturally want to be competitive and they're not going to share and they're not going to share information. If you're in a competitive environment, it's very difficult to find people even, and the question we'll get to later in the episode is finding people to mentor you or help you along because they are also likewise in sort of a scarcity environment. And so I always felt like people were hoarding information. They were being very competitive. If there was like a task that we were supposed to work on, they would work on it with you, but then they'd claim credit for all of it. Like I came up with this idea and then I did all this work and then there'd be awards and stuff like that. And you'd read their award package and you're like, wait a second, you didn't do that. Like you were part of a team that did that, but we didn't have a system that really identified teamwork. And so anyway, I thought this would be an interesting one to talk about. That's my experience. I am naturally a competitive person. I am naturally sort of that type A personality that wants to get things done. But if somebody is going to be doing it with me, I want to be performing at least equal, if not better, than the people that I'm with. I think that's just my natural tendency. And so anyway, so I'll talk about how that affects me as a leader later down, but as a sort of performer or, mid-level person, it made me frantic in some ways. How about you? Did you ever have that experience?
Definitely. Although it's interesting now having this conversation with the research and study I've done and the work that I do in the space of high performers, like what makes a high performer high performing and what makes these high performing teams. I want to ask a question so before I go into my story, I think part of it is we spend a lot of time early in our careers without a clear definition of success, right? Mm-hmm. Like if I ask people that question, how do you define success for yourself? Most people are like, oh my God, I never really thought about articulating it in a particular way. And then you're like, well, then how do you know you're going in the right direction and you're competing for the right things? Because sometimes, and this is what I felt in my career, it was just the competition people wanted. It wasn't necessarily even the I want to, maybe it was, I want a certain plane out of pilot training or something, but it was like this idea that a certain job was what I wanted, because I needed to do that because my mentor did or my boss did, right? And I needed to have the same path that they did. And if I didn't, then it was like doomsday for my career, which is actually a complete false narrative, right? That will then drive our decision-making in those competitive environments. So that would be my question. What do you think about that? Like defining and sitting back and saying, well, this is what's important to me and here's how I define success, so then I can understand where that competition actually has more meaning and what is just me driving to be number one for the sake of being number one.
It's such a good question because I think at that stage, I would say even through my 30s, but success was, you were given what is a successful person, right? You in school, you're given what success is. So to succeed, that means you got good grades. To succeed, that means you got into a good college. To succeed, and then that sort of, whatever culture you're in, they often define success for you. So you'll find, I think that's so true, that I don't know that I ever defined success until I really had to sit down and think about it. I had a family by that point, and my husband and I had to sit down, and Rob and I were like, you know what, success for us probably looks a lot different than success for other people in the military, because we can't allow our family to be separated and we can't allow, some of these ego-driven decisions. But those were never our definition of success. We just were almost lulled into it without doing real active thinking of what is success? What does it look like for me? So I think that's such a good point. If you can define it early on, then you may or may not get caught up in the frenzy. But if you don't take the time to define it, that frenzy just pulls you in before you even have a chance to really think about it.
It will. It'll eat you alive. And then one day you'll turn around and look at your career or where you're at and think, why am I unhappy? Or why did I not achieve the goals that I achieved the goals I thought I wanted? And why isn't it bringing me the contentment or joy or satisfaction? I still want more, right? So what is missing? And I think that's a foundation. Yeah. And I think, in my story, I remember, mine's riddled just like yours, right? From the academy, even before the academy, in high school, and then everything I did there. And in pilot training, I actually was the only female in my class. And I think that's another aspect when you're a female in a male dominated career, a lot of times this pull or desire to have to be the best and be uber competitive in everything you do. At least that's what I felt all the time, because I didn't want to give anyone an excuse to say anything about me being a girl, right? I just wanted to be like, I am just as good as all of the rest of you, right? And so I'm gonna work my butt off to get there. And so I know that was some of that internal drive and motivation in my competitiveness. But it is hard with those teams. And I want to go back to just the research because, when I left command, I actually took a job that I didn't want to get my family stationed together. And I'm sure there's people that have done that, right? Made choices that you were like, this is, when you hierarchy your goals in life and values, family was number one for me. So I was leaving my command and then taking a staff job in New Mexico to get my family together. My husband was a group commander at Kirtland. And I remember sitting there in this cubicle, going from being a commander who had influence, who felt like I reached this competitive milestone, to sitting in a cubicle. There's really no work to do. It was like surfing the internet, and it was so hard for me, right? So hard. But when I have studied high performers, really what I needed to find in that moment was the purpose, right? Like I needed to stop thinking about like, oh, woe is me, here's the moment I'm in. Or even like, I really hated this thing that a lot of my bosses would always say, like, just bloom where you're planted, right? The only thing that I really realized is that we create our own opportunities for ourselves if we have the passion and purpose behind it. And so that's actually where I started this new passion for speaking, this passion for wellness and mentorship. And, I worked with PACE, with the Profession of Arms Center of Excellence, and I created opportunities for myself by just asking questions about what was on the table or what was a potential thing that I could do with my career. But it helped to understand what was driving me. And I developed this purpose statement at the time. And it was, sitting in that cubicle. And I was like, how am I going to get through this, right? Like, what is most important to me? And I wrote my purpose statement was to help people achieve peak performance with a focus on passion, purpose, and presence. And I was doing that as a commander, right? Helping others be their best. But now I'm sitting in this cubicle in this staff job, responsible for no one. How am I going to execute my passion and my purpose? So that's where I went out to find opportunities, because no one cares about your career as much as you do. And I got this adjunct professorship with PACE. I also then worked with the special operations wing at Kirtland and became their director of human performance. And I started on a path that was not about like this competitive space, but more about the foundational of what was most important to me.
Yeah, I think you identify really nicely, I think, the issue that you can go from a scarcity mentality to an abundance mentality. And that is to say that you recognize that there is not a finite number of opportunities. There is not a finite amount of work any organization does. It is infinite the amount of work that can be done. And if you feel yourself getting pulled into fighting over a certain task or a certain job, you're missing the bigger thing. And it might just be that you are uniquely positioned and have skills and traits that allow you to do something even bigger. And so I used to tell myself, don't fight over the pie. Find the next part. Find the next thing that you want to do. Don't fight with these people over this small thing that you're getting sucked into. Find where you are value added to this organization, because there's not a finite amount of work. There's an infinite amount of work. And I think that starts to change you in that abundance, or in your case, you were able to take your skills and then translate them outside, still helping the unit, still helping, right? All of those things are still contributing to the mission or the job. It's just that you're contributing differently. I remember before I went to my first staff job, I think it was my dad that said, it really doesn't matter as much what your job is. It matters what you make your job become. Like, you get to pick. You'll go through and start to pick apart things. And I think I had a tasking, again, a staff job, a desk job for us. And I think I had a tasking to do, hey, you're responsible for tracking this thing. And I was like, oh, I could track that. Or we could rewrite that plan and it could be better. And people are like, oh, okay, if you're willing to take that on, then we'll let you take that on. So instead of taking just the task at hand, you can kind of figure out actually the task that actually needs to be done, or that I'm better suited for, and just sort of work your way in that way. And now you are not fighting over something, but you're applying what's authentically you and unique to you to the skill. And people always appreciate that. I know as a boss, I much rather somebody work on a project that they're going to bring passion, their purpose, all of those things you mentioned to. I'd much rather them work on that than something just because the person before them did that, or because that's the only thing that we can think of to do.
Yeah. And I think that we get in that mindset in the military very easily, right? Because we're looking for others to take our cues instead of looking internally, because the military really doesn't teach us to look internally very often, right? But that's where the hard work is. And very true to high performing individuals. And I'm talking like elite operators, elite athletes, like there are some solid, common characteristics of those people. And one of them is built living on a foundation of purpose and understanding of who they are, right? And I think that's what, we're like the G.I. Joe kind of mentality in the military, where we're going to train everybody the same way and kind of break you down to build you up together. But we're forgetting that there's a lot of uniqueness inside each one of us, but it's our own responsibility to figure out what that is. Nobody else can do it for us. Our mentors can hopefully ask the right questions, so then we can flip, right, that scarcity mindset to the abundance mindset and have some assistance with that. But there are three real common characteristics that I think relate to this conversation. And that first one is having that understanding of who you are and that purpose. The second one is an optimistic framework, because a lot of scarcity mindset is sometimes the narrative in your head saying things are more competitive than they actually are, or putting yourself in this disadvantage actually. Like, think about this from like an enemy standpoint. Like, I'll just take it from like the idea of sleep. Like, if I don't get sleep and then I'm going to have to go fly my plane against the enemy, I may not be, like I'm giving them a leg up because I'm not coming fully prepared to the table. It's the same thing if you were an athlete, right? If you're not doing the things you need to do to prepare yourself for that moment, you're giving the enemy a competitive advantage, or, right, your competitor, however that is. If you have a negative or pessimistic lens as to everything you're looking at, those other people who have the more optimistic lens don't have time to work, right? They're not wasting their time thinking about you. They're just getting after where is, the abundance mindset I can build for me to take advantage of this opportunity and build it into something. So you can be pessimistic and negative, but realize that high performers, a common characteristic is that they have an optimistic framework because they don't want to spend time thinking about those negative what ifs. They would rather put faith in themselves and how they can move forward and create change.
Yeah, because if you're worried about how any other person that you're competing with is performing, you're only negating the energy that it would bring for you to do that same task, right? So as you focus on that, you're actually doubly hurting yourself because you're negatively impacting yourself and you're not doing the activity that you should be doing to contribute. So why even bother worrying about the competition? But did it ever bother you, again, when you're working with people? So when I was a squadron commander, we were sort of pitted against each other a lot of the time, right? You know what I mean? They did that. And I understand why. Some people think that forces people to behave, you know what I mean? When you're in competition, you're going to behave better. You're going to fine tune that and you're going to work harder, right? But I don't find that I work harder when I'm in competition. I find I actually work harder when I'm in cooperation with my teammates and we're all working towards a common goal. So we used to call it, well, I didn't call it this, but someone after the fact said, it was like watching you guys be in the Hunger Games. That's what it was like watching. It was like watching you in the Hunger Games. And I want to say that is such a good warning for leaders, because when leaders do that, when they pit their teams against each other, or they really are not getting the best out of them. You're in fact getting that kind of competitive focus on each other as opposed to focus on our adversary or focus on a goal. So did you ever see something like that, or was that your kind of experience too?
For sure. In fact, I tell this story in a lot of my talks because I frame it in this idea of competitive stress, right? I remember one morning, it was like a Monday morning, all the squadron commanders are sitting down, group commander, wing commander kind of thing. And everyone's just kind of like talking before the meeting starts. And one of my peers, he goes, "Oh, I had such a tough weekend, man. I worked all day Saturday on OPRs and EPRs. Like, I practically slept in my office, right? Like, I've got so much to catch up on. And then I got like a sick kid at home. So I only got like 2 hours of sleep last night, right? And all I had time to grab was like my coffee as I ran out the door, but I'm here to be a badass." And then the next guy's like, "Oh, hold up. I worked all day Saturday and Sunday on OPRs and EPRs. Right. I have 2 sick kids at home, so I didn't even get any sleep last night, nor had time for coffee, but I'm here to be a badass." And then everyone kind of looked, turned to me, I had my yummy green smoothie in front of me. And I'm kind of like, well, I got all my work done last week. My kids only have one parent at home. So I played with them all weekend. Everybody's healthy, slept great, here ready to take on the day. And I kid you not.
Breakfast?
Yeah, great. Yeah, my nutritious breakfast. I kid you not, everyone at the table was like, "Oh, she's obviously not working hard enough." And I was kind of like, doesn't everyone want to know how I do this, right? And they're like, "Nope, I'm going to sleep in my office, work all weekend." And it was almost because that's where the value is, right? Yeah. And then none of the group or wing commanders, even at that moment, said anything "Whoa, Janelle, how are you doing that?" Right? They were humming and hoeing with the other people yeah, she's not working hard enough kind of thing. And I'm like, that is the problem. Because actually the definition of performance is investing in recovery and restoration, not in just this hustle and this competitive, it will kill you, right? The competitive hustle will kill you. And I've seen it with a lot of, whether it's leaders in the military or leaders in other spaces, like they will burn out at that pace, right? Unless you're like superhuman, there are some of those out there, but most of us will hit that brick wall, and maybe we don't have our health with us, or we don't have our families. And it's for what, right? This competitive thing that actually the culture creates for us against each other, instead of that collaborative environment, which actually the research supports.
No, I think that's such a good point. Like, there's a saying, work smarter, not harder. But yet we often sort of give benefits or give credit to those people that just work all hours of the night. And you think to yourself, you're not being more efficient, and you're certainly not the kind of person that I would want to work for. Imagine, you know what I mean? Your people, that law of mirror, they see how you act, they will do the same thing. They're going to act the way you act. So if you act within that scarcity mindset and you value people that work all hours of the night and never take a break, right? Never take the recovery, well, they're going to do the same thing. And that's just not good leadership. So I think it's so funny too, because I think one of the other key skills is identifying what really brings you, you said passion and purpose. I often think about like, what brings you, what are you strong at? What is that thing that when you do, you feel strong? And for me, it's always problem solving. What problem? I don't care what problem it is. I just like to work on a problem and try and solve a problem. And so if there, whatever it is at work, that's one of my strengths, is to look at a problem and work our way through it. And that's really, can be very valuable. But if I'm not in a position to do that, then sometimes I don't know that I'm allowed to just go out and work on a problem set. And that took me a long time to realize I'm pretty good at that. I can handle that. Give me that problem. I'll work through it, give you some analysis, give you some, options or solutions, and then you guys can move forward. So I think identifying what you're good at, what your strength is also really important, right? You have the passion for it, you have that purpose, and you have that sort of, that's your strength. That's something that you feel good when you do.
Can you backing up on that strength? Because I'm recalling a really great conversation you and I had at your house one night about the myth of like our strengths.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so, like most of us think that because I'm really good at something, I'm naturally good at it or whatever, then it's my strength. So that's the direction I should head.
That's what I should be doing. Obviously, I'm good at it. Therefore, right. I think you redefine strength and weaknesses as to how you feel when you're doing it, right? When you flow that you get when you do it. So when you do something and the result is I feel strong because I did a thing, it doesn't necessarily mean that the end result is particularly good or not good, however that's defined, but you feel strong, that's a strength. And something that pulls you down, that's actually, I frame that as a weakness. So for example, you can be really good at administrative work, but when you do it, you feel like drained. It's just a slug to get through. I would define that as a weakness because it's making me weaker in my performance. But where I feel good, where I get into flow, again, when I'm working on a problem or we're trying to put together something and thinking big, that's what I love to do. I feel strong. And so I redefine strengths and weaknesses by that way. And I think it helps me realize you can be good at something. That doesn't mean I should be doing it, because that's not an actual thing that makes me strong as in the workforce or at home or something like that. Now, I'm not to say that, there's just tasks sometimes that we don't. I mean, you and I both know in the military, there's just tasks that we do. It's not to say that you're like, well, that's a weakness of mine, therefore I don't do. I'm just saying you have to balance it in your mind to know, hey, that's not going to be where I should spend most of my time. So like program management is a great example. I know so many people that get sucked into program management because they are quote unquote good at it. I'll tell you, that is a skill. Like there's no question, there's a skill. That's a whole discipline in and of itself. But some people really hate managing programs, right? It just drains them, but they get pulled into it the whole time. And I have a really good friend, she's a PM, and I mean, miserable when she does that job. And you think to yourself, well, stop doing the dang job. But she's like, yeah, but I'm really good at it. I'm like, that doesn't mean you should do that job. That's not a strength. That really actually is a weakness. So that's been helpful for me to realize, like, I don't know. There's so many skills like that I think can be really draining that you go, like, that's just not, I shouldn't be doing that. So
I love how you frame it that way. And I think one note really with entrepreneurs, because I know we may have some of those listening as well. I think that's a trap that entrepreneurs get in, is that you try to do everything because you're like, well, I'm kind of good at this and I'm kind of good at that. And the thing that really brings you joy and that, right, it makes you feel like you're executing that purpose and that is the strength, right, goes to the wayside, right? For me, that's my creative energy. That's me being on stage. That's me writing. But I find as an entrepreneur, there's like business stuff, right? Like you said, admin stuff like that has to be done. And I will spend hours sometimes on it and like, but I'm really good at it. I don't want to outsource it, or I can figure this out. And you have to sometimes realize there's only so much time in the day. And honestly, if you really let that joy and that passion like lead you and the things you spend time on, your whole business and the direction you're going will all kind of fit into place a lot better. So that's kind of like just one piece of mentorship for those entrepreneurs out there. Really take that to heart. Figure out like, these are all the tasks we do as entrepreneurs. Which ones are the ones that I'm not just good at, but like that bring me that joy and make me feel good when I do them. And then I can outsource.
Is that what you found that you've done now, is sort of say, okay, these are the things that really are taking away from my focus of the passion purpose that I want to do. So find somebody else to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to have a team. Like even an entrepreneur, sometimes you're like, nope, I'm going to be like self-employed. I still am self-employed with a business of one, right? Which is what I wanted for the flexibility and freedom of running my own business. But I have a team, because you can't, you're not going to be successful if you try to put everything on your shoulders. And I know entrepreneur burnout is a huge issue today, because we do think like, well, we don't want to outsource it because that's money away from like the business. But in the end, when you can focus on the things that are your strengths, like the business will flourish.
That's a really good point. Maybe we should do one of the subsequent shows on burnout, keys to either watching before you get into burnout or getting yourself out of burnout. Hey, I wanted to bring up a question. Okay, so we got an email, and to the viewers, again, if you have any emails that you want to send us in questions, we appreciate that. We've received quite a few. I want to go to one that Matt sent us a couple weeks ago, actually. But our email is creatinglift98@gmail.com. So please send us your questions. We'll love to talk about the topic, or we might be, spurred to a certain topic based on your question. But Matt is he's a screenwriter. So he's written for NBC and Lifetime, Hallmark Channel, all kinds of things. And he was talking about when he first entered into the workplace, into his sort of the film industry workplace, he really was thoughtful about who he would ask to be mentors. And he did some research, and he sort of approached people within his industry about being mentors for him. And he almost all of them, he says, shut him down because they hinted that edge that he would get by learning their lessons or having them as a mentor would actually come back to create competition for them, i.e. they don't want to create another person in their industry that would later on, again, scarcity mindset. And that's the word. He said they often would say, we don't have enough opportunities to go around, so I don't want to contribute to that. So anyway, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on what a person in that situation could do, or, some things to keep in mind for somebody that's in a career like Matt would be.
So first, if I'm getting this correctly, it's like the mentors, the people with more experience, don't even want, like they have the wrong mentality. Let me just put that there, right? Like when you're a leading individual in an organization or in a profession, your job is actually to not just create followers, but create more leaders, right? Like that. And so if you don't have that mindset, you yourself, right, like that are stuck in a rut that's really not going to get you to where you want to go. But the problem is many times people don't have the awareness, right, that that's actually what's going on. So just a quick side note about, how broken, right, just that whole concept is. But what I would say to Matt is that sometimes if you can't find those mentors within like your space, right, mentorship comes in so many different forms, right? Like I have learned things from other industries or people that have been successful in other ways that then I can then take and work in the space that I'm in my own way, right? So I would not let that get you down. Like if you've approached people and they've turned you down. I mean, here's the other thing, like some people may just, honestly, maybe isn't it their scarcity mindset. Maybe it's also, like calendars and busyness, right? So I've asked people to mentor me before and they're like, oh, I just don't have so much on my plate, right? I can't. So you can find mentorship in other professions, right? I hope like just even Beth and I and having these conversations is a form of mentorship to help you achieve the goals that you're looking to achieve in the future. But also like witnessing and studying, right? Like people that you like want to emulate. And even if you can't have those conversations with them, like they're probably on podcasts, right? And listen to those conversations that they're having, and do the Google search, right? And you might be able to kind of like garner some of that information. But honestly, if someone is not willing to even have a conversation or start a relationship in that certain way, it may just be busyness. But if it's really that scarcity mindset and they're saying you're going to now compete against me, that's not the kind of mentor I think you want anyway.
Yeah, I think you're so right. So you can look outside that very close environment, maybe a little bit broader, and see if there's some lessons you can learn. But I'm also reminded of something we often say in military planning. We'll say, with great challenge comes great opportunity. And so something I might also add to Matt's concern is, okay, so build the bench, right? Look out there, and if you can build your bench. So what you know is for sure that person A, B, and C are not going to be working on building the bench, right? They have that scarcity mentality. They're going to be kind of hunkered down, and therefore their thinking and their teamwork and the people contributing to working those problems are probably pretty limited, which in a way can be a great opportunity for those people that are willing to be open and honest, the people that are willing to build a much deeper bench. So even though you're younger and maybe less knowledgeable, if you approach it from the abundance mindset of like, hey, I actually could build a huge team here of people that all contribute, right? It's sort of like that idea of open source software versus closed source. And they find over time that open source coding actually creates much more resilient software, because there's been a whole bunch of people contributing. And so another thing to remind yourself is that you have an opportunity to introduce abundance mindset, because there's no way that every good film has already been thought of. There is no way that every good, TV show or series has already been thought of. And so I would just say, hey, that's maybe an opportunity for you to do it differently. Now that doesn't answer the question about how do I eventually, get a meeting with a certain exec. That one is still tough. You still have to build your network. But I think building the bench and that abundance mindset has always been a better strategy to get after problem solving than the closed mindset. So.
Yeah, one example in my lifetime, and Matt, maybe there's some parallels, or maybe there's some parallels with other folks, is that I had a boss one time that she saw me as competition, right? But didn't see that there was value actually in me being on her team. Like I wasn't really her competition. Like sometimes like I'm way down here, she's way up here. And I still had a lot of leaders and bosses at times that would just see this as a competition when like we are nowhere near competing for the same jobs right now, right? But here's something that I noticed in the female space of the military is that when you are one of only, right? If you're like the only one you get some uniqueness assigned to you. And so sometimes like when you're the only female at the table, if another female wants to come, grab a chair, you're not so special anymore, right? Like, and a lot of people feel threatened by that. So I had to also learn it's not about me, right? Their own insecurities. And so that's something else that like, I'll just say, if you're trying to find mentors and they have this scarcity mentality, they don't want to share their uniqueness, or they feel threatened by you in any certain way, right? Like, don't let that dissuade you or change your mindset, because it's really not about you. It's just about them.
Amen. So, and I remember this time in your career, and it was so silly to watch from an outsider's perspective, but you're right. And maybe one of these times too, we'll talk about that tokenism, because that has affected so many of us, right? Especially our generation of women in the Air Force. And I think we realize now, and we regret some of the ways that we might have been better able to support other women or other other diverse groups of people. So that's definitely something we want to talk about. All right. Well, our time is coming to a close. Matt, thank you so much for the question. Again, we love getting questions on the emails. We have a couple other ones in the lineup, but we are always open to more. We have on YouTube, we are Creating Lift. That's the channel. We'll always post our videos here and here on Fireside Chat. creatinglift98@gmail is our email, and we are happy to either respond or bring it onto the stage, or if anyone's ever willing to be a guest on the show, we would just love to see you here too. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Janelle, why don't you close us out?
Yeah, thank you so much. I always love our conversations, Beth. I hope everybody out there continues to share this information, have their own conversations, and lift each other up. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.